Hey guys, and welcome to the March 2016 edition of Budget MTG. This is a series of videos I do every month on this channel. There's a new one of these decks, one of these Budget MTG decks, the second Wednesday of every month. And this month, the month of March in 2016, I am doing a mono white standard white Weenie deck as the deck for this month's episode. Before I get into talking about the deck, I wanted to say my videos are also some of the content that is posted on paperchampion.net. If you are looking for more great Magic the Gathering content, you should go check that website out. The link is in the description for this video. Anyway, so yes, this month, a mono white aggro deck, which in the olden days people called White Weenie. And that's what we have here. Building a monocolor deck is an easy way to make your deck a lot more budget than it would be otherwise. It also means, in this specific case, that we can pick up some more expensive cards that would be hard to fit into a deck that had a more expensive mana base if our deck wasn't monocolored. We also get the bonus in being monocolored of the fact that none of our lands come into play tapped. Our deck's already really fast. The fact that none come into play tapped makes our deck even faster against opponents who have to be playing their battle lands and their gain lands and the lands for each of the Khans from Khans of Tarkir and things like that. So our deck is already fast, doesn't have to deal with that. We don't have to worry about fixing. The deck rarely has mana problems. Most of the time, 2 lands is enough for this deck to get rolling. So I'm sort of talking about why it is this deck is monocolored, because I know people are going to be like, what's the point of it being monocolored when it could be better if you made it 2 colors. And I don't know that that's necessarily true in a deck filled with as many white mana symbols as we have here. So anyway, we'll get into talking about the deck. As you can see, it's mostly 1 and 2 drops. We have 33 creatures, 7 non-creatures. So our deck's goal is to just turn our creatures sideways, get in under most of the big strategies in this format, and outrace the other aggro decks in this format. I mean, it can get under most of the dragon-related strategies and other control decks, and it can race, Eldrazi Blue and things like that. So what we have in our 1-drop slot is 11 1-mana 2/1s. They all have a little bit of upside, some more than others. Dragon Hunter is a 1-mana 2/1. He can block dragons as though he had reach, and he has protection from dragons. So late game, he can both not be blocked by dragons and help me when there's a race going on, and my Dragon Hunter can stay back and block. Have 4 of those. We have 3 Kytheon, Hero of Akros, an example of a somewhat expensive card that we can afford to get in under our budget, which, by the way, this deck's under 30 tickets. I'll show you that before the video's over. Because he's somewhat expensive, but he fits into this deck because it's monocolored. 1-mana 2/1 can make himself indestructible, which sometimes is relevant. And as this deck often will be doing, if he attacks with more than 2 other creatures, he flips and becomes an even bigger beater, or a guy who makes my guys indestructible, or so forth. He gets even better, basically. And then we have Mardu Woe Reaper, who's another 1-mana 2/1 with a bit of upside. This isn't exactly a warrior deck, but we do have 10 warriors in the deck that trigger this, including itself. So occasionally we'll get to exile a card from a Rally deck's graveyard or other things like that. And gain life at the same time, which is not irrelevant, and it's a 1-mana 2/1. So then we have 23 2-mana creatures. We run 1 Felidar Cub to deal with decks that run Silk Wrap, such as this one, which I'll show you in a second, and other things. There's more in the sideboard, but I'll get to that later. And it's, a reasonable body that can occasionally get rid of a problem enchantment. 2 Hidden Dragon Slayers. The majority of the time I play these as a 2-mana 2/1 lifelinker, but you can also play it face down and occasionally blow something up. It's good against decks with Temur Battle Rage and Become Immense combos, for example. I have 2 Relic Seekers. You'll notice I have no equipment in the deck. Did toy with the idea of running one of the Stoneforge Masterworks in this deck because most of my creatures are human, but in the end I decided I didn't really want to be spending mana on anything but playing creatures or getting blockers out of my way. So I don't have any equipment, but he's a 2-mana 2/2, gets bigger with Renown. He's basically 2 extra copies of Topin Freeblade, but a little less good than Topin Freeblade in this specific deck. We have 3 Silk Wraps, great removal spell, cheap, efficient. We can use it after we've dropped a 1-drop and a 2-drop, who perhaps both, one of which at least will have Renown, to get a blocker out of the way, get the guy Renown, and get in for, 4 to 5 more damage. There's 4 Topin Freeblades, 4-mana 2/2s with Vigilance and Renown 1. The guys who can get to 3 toughness with Renown are kind of ideal, are good right now in the metagame because of all the Wild Slashes and Fiery Impulses out there. Wild Slash can never deal with a Renown Topin Freeblade, and Fiery Impulse only can with Spell Mastery. Same for Relic Seeker. I have one Valorous Stance main board. Both modes are relevant from time to time. I find myself using both of them. The first can save one of my important creatures from a Radiant Flames or something, and the other can destroy a dragon, as is happening in that picture, I suppose. Then I have 3 Anafenza Kintree Spirits. I would love to run 4. Too bad she's a legend. If I can play her on turn 2, my board gets ridiculous if my opponent can't quickly deal with it. Quickly gets out of range of Radiant Flames and Flaying Tendrils, and that's a good thing to have happen. I have 4 Consul's Lieutenants. Difficult creature to block for most creatures that are being played right now in Standard. Arishan Cleric being one of the exceptions because it has first strike. And then when it hits the opponent, it gives my whole team an Anthem whenever it has Renown and my other creatures are attacking. When it attacks 2, it can attack 2 when it's doing it, but it doesn't pump itself. Worth noting. 3 Knight of the White Orchids. I like these for a number of reasons. They're 2 mana 2/2s with first strike, which is already pretty good attacker, pretty good blocker too if it has to be blocking. But on top of that, it lets me play fewer lands in my deck, which means more dudes, which is what we want to cram 33 dudes into the deck. And it can, if you're on the draw, you're going to be able to trigger Knight of the White Orchid's ability pretty easily without even having to sort of play that way. This deck often also just gets 2 lands in the opening hand, doesn't draw one for a while anyway, and it gets me that 3rd land, increases my chance of drawing more non-lands, and it can also help me get to my Archangel, which you see in the 4-drop slot, and I'll get to in a moment. More removal, we have Stasis Snare. I really like Silk Wrap and Stasis Snare because they destroy creatures that have annoying whenever this creature dies abilities. We have Matter Reshaper running around right now. What else do we have? Hangerback Walker. Those are the 2 big culprits. Stasis Snare can do it at instant speed, which I love. Can be useful against decks with Temur Battle Rage. Become immense combos. And we have a curve topper of Archangel of Tides. We run 3 of them, not 4, because our deck, only runs 20 lands. But the 3 are very strong. Most of the time, if this deck can play this card in a game, it just doesn't lose, barring something crazy like a Crux of Fate, because it makes it so my opponent has to leave mana up just to block my little 2/1s and things like that. And that becomes a real issue for them. Meanwhile, the Archangel and potentially other creatures are just picking away at the opponent. Survives Radiant Flame, survives Flaying Tendrils, so it's a nice curve topper in that sense. Its ability to make my opponent pay to attack is only relevant the turn after I play it because it's almost always swinging after that. This deck's very aggressive, almost always tends to be swinging unless something's going on that doesn't let me swing, which is pretty rare. This deck tries to be pretty aggressive. So now we'll talk about the sideboard. 2 more Felidar Cubs for enchantment-heavy decks. As I said, Silk Wrap, also Stasis Snare running around. They'd be a good sideboard against us. They're a good sideboard against other people. Hallowed Moonlight is a great sideboard card against both Rally and Collected Company. It's not bad against Hangerback Walker or Matter Reshaper, I guess, either. But we have better things mainboard to deal with those. But not so much the Rally decks or the Collected Company decks. This negates the spell for our opponent while also replacing itself, which I love. Side it in all the time against those decks. If you're not siding these in your white decks in Standard right now, you should be. They have gone up in price a lot because of it, but they're still under 2 tickets on Magic Online. 1 Radiant Purge. These have gone up in value for me. Used to never want to sideboard this, but it's worth noting that every single one of the man lands that everyone's running right now are gold creatures. So Radiant Purge destroys them. Once they turn themselves into creatures, you can Radiant Purge them. It's also useful against dragons and other multicolored problem creatures in the format. Well, those are the major uses. I only have 1 because, like I just said, it's not it's not catch-all. Not everyone's going to be running things they can hit with it, and I don't always want to be siding it in. And probably 80% of matchups you don't side it in. Surge of Righteousness is good against another aggro deck, especially red ones. Helps us race them more effectively by both killing one of their creatures and gaining us life, and I like that. It can also be used, offensively if my opponent blocks to get rid of like their Tassiger or something like that, which is occasionally relevant. I have Suspension Field to replace my Silk Wraps against some opponents. Against opponents who are running, the card I just mentioned, Tassiger or Dragons, Suspension Field is just better than Silk Wrap. They don't run very many low curve creatures other than like Jace, so Suspension Field is usually better. I have an additional Valorous Stance in the sideboard. Better against the control opponents who have a big, fat win condition and also have ways of sweeping my board because it can make things indestructible. I have 2 Lantern Scouts for sort of the mirror match. Don't see myself running into a lot of other white Weenie decks right now. It's not like an archetype Maybe, if I do really well, maybe it will be. But it is good against any aggro deck because it makes the race go in your favor. 3 mana 3/2 isn't horrible as is. I mean, you don't really want to be playing that in constructed, but giving your whole team lifelink, and our team's going to usually be pretty big even on turn 3. Just getting in for 4 or 6 and gaining that back makes a big difference against a lot of opponents. I run 1 Make a Stand for against people running Radiant Flames. It's a good counter to that. It's not an amazing sideboard card. I only run 1, but because we're not running blue and we don't have access to counter mana, counter magic, that's the best we can do. And then I have 2 Vryn Wingmares for siding in against basically every mid-range to control deck. Decks running Crackling Doom, decks running anything like that. Vryn Wingmare gets even better. Any deck that wants to be casting lots of removal or counter spells, you want your Vryn Wingmare in the deck. Even if your opponent has to fire off removal to kill it, they're having to pay 1 extra mana, and you're slowing them down considerably by making them do that. And especially against us, where we're pretty capable of winning on turns 5 or 6 if things are going ideally. So that is the deck. I will show you how much it costs real quickly. It costs $29.58 as of the first week of March. This is coming up. This video will be up about a few days after I'm done recording, so I'm recording it a little ahead of time. Most of the cards in the deck are pretty cheap, but we have Archangel of Tides, who's a mythic, 3 copies of which cost you about $7. And Kithion also is about $6, and Offense is not cheap either. But other than that, the deck's really not very costly. It'll cost a little bit more in Paper Magic, of course. In the description for this video, you can find the tappedout.net link, which will show you what it costs in Paper Magic. And if you haven't noticed already, you may have noticed that this month I'm doing a league. Right now we're looking at the league screen where I can look at my deck instead of where I usually do this. I decided from now on for this series of Budget MTG, I will be playing in leagues instead of 3 matches and 2-man queues. I started doing this series before leagues ever existed, and because of that, the queues were sort of the best way to just be able to play games whenever I wanted to, which is ideal for me when I'm recording these. But now that leagues exist, and they've existed for a while, I haven't really thought to get into them, but I suddenly realized it'd be a good idea. So now you'll get 5 matches, and it works for me as well for my schedule because I can record the games whenever I have free time instead of having to sit down and play a tournament. So that is the deck for this month's Budget MTG. We'll see how we do in the league. I'll be recording all the matches, and they should all be in the same playlist as this video. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.